So this morning, we have a story. We have a story of a whole bunch of workers that got to work at a different time. It's a story that Jesus is telling. See, they should have all begun at the beginning of the day, but they didn't. But let's say that you got there at the beginning of the day. We'll call it 7 a.m. You rolled out of bed early. You kissed your family while they slept. You pulled on your work clothes and you walked down to the Dunkin' Donuts to wait for someone to choose you to work for the day. That's where the day laborers on Long Island, where I used to live, would go to wait and hope. You think to yourself, well, if I get up early, I'll be sure to get some work. So off you go. And sure enough, according to the story, you and the others who rolled out early are picked up for the day. You start early and you'll work hard all day until the sun goes down, and then you're going to collect your pay and go home. Now, a couple of hours later, another crew shows up. Our story says that it's 9 a.m. Maybe you're a little jealous that they got to sleep in, but you give them a head nod, thinking how lucky it was that the landowner needed more people to work the vineyard that day. So maybe you are generous in your attitude toward the 9 a.m. arrivals. But when another group shows up at noon, well, you might just have a few judgments about them. I mean, had they been out drinking all night the night before and they slept in and they're hungover and now their mother or their spouse has told them to get their lazy selves out of bed and off to work? You probably don't consider the possibility that they might have had to take care of their mother who perhaps was ill, or take care of their children as a single parent before they hurry down to the Dunkin' Donuts to wait for that slim chance that they might too be picked up. But they do get picked up, lucky for them. This happens again at 3 p.m. What's their story, right? You're thinking they've laid the day away before they headed down to the DD to be picked up. It doesn't even cross your mind that perhaps this time the landowner might actually have driven around to look for idle workers and offer them a job. And it may not also occur to you that, it's late in the day and they did accept the opportunity to work, even if it was only for a few hours. But when it gets to 5 o'clock and those 5 o'clock workers show up, you likely just shake your head. I mean, by the time they arrive, the day is already just about done. By now you're tired. You have been working for 10 hours and the sun is setting. You just shake your head. I mean, you can't even imagine how they fritter away their day. You make your assumptions, but you're wrong this time, because you haven't been privy to the conversation that we were privy to this morning. Let me remind us of it. It was about 5 o'clock. And the landowner went out and found some others standing around. He asked them the question, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" And they say to him, "Because no one has hired us." It's not because they were lazy. It's not because they didn't have anything better to do. It's because they waited all day and no one hired them. But he did. Well, the day finally ends and the manager lines you all up and you're waiting, and you see, he starts with the latest, the people who came in at the end, and so you're in the back of the line, you get to see how everybody's being paid. And, you figure, well, he's putting the others earlier and sooner because it's just going to give them a token. And how much are you going to give to somebody who worked an hour? How much you give to somebody who worked 3 hours? He figures they're just going to get a little bit of something. So first, your eyes must be deceiving you, because he just gave him full pay. That guy who showed up at 5 o'clock, that whole group got a full day's pay. And then the 3 o'clockers did. And then the noon shower-uppers did. And even the 9 a.m. folks did. So all of them got a full day's pay. And clearly, since you got up early before the sun rose and worked the longest, surely you were going to receive more. Bonus! But when you get to the front of the line, you too get the same amount as everyone else, even those who barely worked at all. It's not fair. It's not fair at all. But then the owner says, didn't I pay you what we contracted for? You worked a full day. I gave you a full day's wages. Am I not allowed to do with what I have, with my belongings, to choose to do whatever I want to do with them? Are you jealous or envious because I'm generous? It just doesn't seem fair. I mean, who ached and labored from morning to sunset? Shouldn't you get more? Isn't the landowner's generosity unfair? Well, we balk at disparity. We don't like it when the rules don't apply to everyone, especially when it comes to rewards. If I do something better than you, then my reward should be better than yours, right, Pastor Karen? That's right. If I work more than you, then I should get more money than you do. But were the rules applied unfairly in our story this morning? The day weary laborers are grumbling that they have been treated unfairly, but were they? Was the landowner stingy? No. He gave them a full day's wages, just as they contracted. They're going to be able to go home and feed their family. Their home is safe for another night and another day. No, he wasn't. It wasn't that he didn't give them enough. It was that he was incredibly generous to the latecomers, those who worked only 3 hours and those who only worked 1 hour. They also received a day's wage. So you know what? They were also able to go home and feed their families, and their home was safe for another night and another morning. Unfair or generous? To ask the same question that the landowner asked to the complainer, doesn't the owner have the right to do what he wants with what belongs to him? Or are we resentful because he's generous? But here's a thought. What if we're not talking about work as labor? What if what we're really talking about is work as a life of faith? What if this is really a story about a life of faith, entered early or entered late? Let me introduce you to our word of the day. Are you ready? The word is grace. God's grace, freely given, generously given, regardless of when we came to God's vineyard, regardless of when we came to a life of faith. Now, we know there are those among us today who fairly emerged from the womb, already prepared to live a life filled with as much love and forgiveness and generosity of time and service and resources that they can muster. Let's call them those who arrived at 7 a.m. And then does that account for all of us? No, I don't think so. Did we all start being so clear about how God's grace should direct our lives and bless our lives? And perhaps some among us came to a life of faith as children or as teenagers. Let's call that 9 a.m. How about those who came to faith and really got to work, so to speak, as they were raising their children? Those among us that got here at, say, noon. Or how about those who came to God's grace later than that? We can call that 3 o'clock. And come on now, 5 o'clock, let's be honest. Some of us have lived some pretty funky lives outside of God's grace. Others of us just don't know it. Others of us just didn't know it was even there for us until quite late in our journey, or should I say 5 o'clock. Sometimes this grace happens pretty far into our lives, pretty far into the day of our lives, maybe even on the last days of our life, maybe even on our deathbeds. In fact, this is often where the conversation about this passage goes. In fact, this is where the conversation went this morning at Java for the Journey. The question that gets posed is, If a person can just accept God's grace or accept Jesus as their savior or become a Christian, however you want to phrase it, on their deathbed, then why am I bothering to live a life of faith at all? In the story, the question would have been, why did I show up at 7 a.m. if I could have shown up at 5 and gotten the same reward? If I'm going to apply myself rigorously all my life, or most of my life, or half of my life, or at least the part of my life that I still have now, to discipleship, to following Jesus, and the guy who makes a deathbed confession gets the same eternal reward, then why am I bothering to be a person of faith? So the question we're going to pose for ourselves this morning is this. Regardless of when you started this journey of faith, if you are here this morning, it doesn't look like you'll be making a deathbed confession. So you've been out in the field working your faith for some amount of hours, perhaps even your whole life. Question, what difference does that make? What does it matter that you're living a life of faith? This is one of those important questions to be able to answer. In fact, one of the letters in our New Testament challenges us to always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So, can you answer the question? Why does your life of faith make a difference to you? It isn't actually a question that I can answer for you. It's one that you need to answer for yourself. And you really should search for that answer. Because without it, I'm not sure what we're doing here this morning. The people who came to work at 5 o'clock told the landowner that they weren't part of the workforce because nobody had asked them. How can we invite people to join us in faith if we can't tell them why it matters to us? So why does living a life of faith matter to you? It's not a question I can answer you, but let me pose some questions that might help you get to your answer. Ready? Okay, here we go. Number one, what difference has it made in your life to follow Jesus? What difference has it made? How has God's presence blessed you in times of need? How has God's grace healed you? How has it grown you as a person who seeks justice for others? How has it stretched you to oppose racism and discrimination of all kinds? How has it taught you to love with less conditions and maybe even sacrificially? How has it taught you to forgive more than what society expects of you? How has it made you a more generous steward of the blessings God has put in your care? How does worshiping and serving and studying with other workers in God's vineyard give your life meaning? How does it challenge you to express light in the world, or hope, or joy, or love, even when life is at its most challenging? How does it change the tenor of your day to know that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image? How does it bring purpose to your life to know that you are Christ's hands of labor in the world? What makes how you live your life of faith in God's field of labor worthwhile, even though others come late or hardly share any of the work at all? You need to answer your own question. When you're done reflecting on these questions, I hope that you can easily, or at least readily, account to anyone who asks you why you're a person of faith. And I hope when you do that you are filled with peace that surpasses understanding, and with God's love that's unconditional, and with a deep, abiding hope that holds to steady even in life's most difficult chapters. See, in God's economy, everyone who chooses God's grace gets a full measure of it. The scale of fair and unfair, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in how God doles out grace. God's eager to pour grace out on anyone who seeks it, and that includes you, and it includes me, and that includes the person who shows up on their deathbed. I invite you to rejoice every time you see someone respond to it. Even if you've been laboring in the field sacrificially and hard all your life and some latecomer just catches on. I also encourage you to invite them into the field, even if it's 5 o'clock. Be prepared to give an account of your faith, that they might be intrigued and encouraged by your hope to come along. And then welcome them with open arms and be delighted that they might experience the grace that you have had the opportunity to experience all along. And I wish you every blessing on the journey. Amen.